You are listening to the Mohua show, where it's all about celebrating the Junoon among changemakers and their journey.
Languages and people need representation in different ways, and theater or
Yes.
art has a responsibility to do it. We often brush aside, smaller languages, cultures, art, and kind of only look at them when it has to be made exotic to some extent.
What was it like to translate the still images into live performance, and what challenges or surprises did that entire process of this whole collaboration bring about for you, Mritunjay?
So also letting go, that's a very critical part of any collaborative piece or any collaborative work, I'd say. We went through about 20 different iterations of it. I would write, share it with him, he would look at it, it's not working, again write. So it will again come back to, the drawing board, and kept on doing this.
What makes someone leave the safety of a job to chase stories across mountains, rivers, and forgotten towns? What does it mean to carry a camera not just as a tool but as a way of witnessing migration, memory, and the meaning of home? Today on the show, we speak with Mritunjay Kumar, a documentary photographer, filmmaker, and development storyteller whose work moves between the intimate and the political. From working as a TT, yes, you heard me right, in railways, to exhibiting at festivals like Serendipity and Bangalore International Centre, his journey is anything but linear. We'll talk about what it takes to start over, why the migrant story matters, and how art can be both a struggle and a sanctuary. Stay with us. This one's about movement, memory, and the power of holding on, just long enough to let it all go. Welcome in today's episode, Mritunjay.
Thank you for having me here. It's really great to be here.
So you were working as a railway ticket collector in Indian Railways, right? You moved to Bombay in 2008 after your MBA, worked in the corporate sector thereafter, and then transitioned and became a full-time documentary photographer. Looking back, how would you define that transition? And, क्या-क्या key challenges रहे आपके, missteps and moments of breakthrough? That will be wonderful. And my God, I mean, you are really the change maker to really change, your entire life all around and go into a space that is so, there is no guarantee with the work of an artist. So tell me all about it.
So I think, a bit of where I grew up is important to the story. So I grew up in a town called Bokaro Steel City, which is now in Jharkhand, used to be part of Bihar. And it's one of those, classical steel townships that were built in the 60s and the 70s when India was really looking to kind of build in India at that point in time. And even that had no template to it. India was a country which was developing, which had just, gotten free. And hence the spirit itself, so to say, was one of, that, oh, we are going out and getting it done. So the town itself was built on those ethos, and you could see it was in Bihar at that point in time. And the typical typecasting that Bihar receives is that, oh, it's one of those, states which is backward and whatever not. And even Jharkhand has kind of, carried forward that image. It's got stuck to it. But the fact remained that Bokaro was almost like an island. People from all walks of life from across India were in that one small town. So my principal through my schooling days was a Keralite. Many of my teachers were from down south, from Karnataka, from Tamil Nadu, from Andhra, from Orissa, and from up north. So it was a wonderful city or a town to grow up in. Having said that, of course, the popular imagination was that if you are good at studies and you're a guy, you will end up in an engineering college. You will go through IITs, and there were only so many IITs at that point in time. The whole shift and movement towards Bangalore and Indore and Gwalior was not even, had not started at that point in time.
No.
So when I chose to not do engineering, which was the set in stone kind of a prophecy, especially if you are half decent at studies, that was like that was an act of rebellion in itself. And it was not kindly received. But I got through this one exam, which my friends actually wanted to kind of apply to. And I was only interested because that was the first time I would have left Bokaro and not gone only to my, village, my ancestral place during my summer vacations, but actually would get to travel to a new city, hopefully Calcutta, because that is where the exam centers used to be usually. But as luck would have it, I ended up receiving the center in Bokaro itself. Um, and that travel never happened. But when I finally got through the exam and I was able to kind of, secure an admission, my parents agreed to it because that was the ultimate middle class dream at that point in time. You are going to get a government job, and that too with an organization like railways. Um, because even after engineering, I mean, you can attempt it, IIT, exams, and you can crack it or not crack it. And what will you do thereafter? Some of the students ended up in Delhi preparing for UPSC and things like those, right? So I got a job. I was in Calcutta for 2 years, studied there, and from there on, the journey started. But I also figured that, there's only so much and so far that you will go in this job. And that is where I started looking for the next. And the next, because again, you had only limited visibility and understanding of how it works. I decided to do an MBA, like one of the most cliched things one you could do. Again, it was a private college, which scared my parents and many of my well-wishers at that point in time because the fee was high and you come from a certain background and how will you afford it and what's the guarantee that you will get something good after this. So all those questions were there. And at times, I think you just need to be not afraid to the extent of being stupid. And that I think worked. So those leaps of faith were very critical, were very important. Having said that, if you ask about the key challenges, I think it's staying motivated, finding work, staying motivated, striking a balance between the commissioning organizations, what the commissioning organization or the client expects and what you wish to do as an artist or a creator, staying motivated, doing not the creative parts of the work, staying motivated, saying no to work that can't fit your schedule or your skill set or doesn't excite you, staying motivated, managing finances, and staying motivated.
Really tough one. I know exactly what you're saying. Mritunjay, I'm a writer myself, so I know exactly what you're saying. I get it. So let's talk about your photography exhibition. That's where I met you, the House Blue. So the House Blue has received critical attention. What prompted you to photograph your family's government quarter, on the last day of occupancy? Was it a conscious artistic choice or something more instinctive? And I could relate to it a lot because, I grew up in Delhi also, in a government home. And I can relate to a lot of it. And so to me, the images in House of Blue carried it was so emotional for me. So tell me a little bit about that.
So my family stayed in that city for almost 4 decades. My father joined in quite early in his life. And then, of course, in those days, you didn't change jobs like today, right? So my family stayed there for 40 years, my parents, that is. And I left home quite early. I mean, I left home quite early. So after my standard 10th, I had left that city. But even through my travels and having stayed in so many cities in India, staying, outside India for some time, and even today, 6 years later, after I took those pictures and we left that city, vacated it, and I never went back. I never was able to go back. Still today, if you ask me where you're from and where is home, I'll still say Bokaro. So that city and that home, which was last in the series of 4 quarters that we had, was very special. I was visiting town because of some official work. My parents had already moved out. And it was only my father and I who were at the house because I was visiting there and my father had the keys. So that particular morning, he suddenly said that, your work is done. I don't have any other work left. I've already filed my papers. We could retain the house for a year, but 4 months in, this happened. And then he suddenly said that tomorrow when you leave, I'll also leave and I'll hand over the keys. So it was not planned. Nothing was planned, in fact, because I thought that we have the house for another 7, 8, 9 months. And I think I reacted. It probably was not a response. It was a reaction to what I heard. And, this immense sense of loss. The only home that I had known and have known was going away. So the images were not planned or taken, with an artistic eye. It was merely a reaction of the child who was actually losing the home and the man who has still not found it.
Beautiful, Mritunjay. Spoken like a true artist. So this is deeply personal. So the project evolved into a collaborative theatre piece with Anish Victor. What was it like to translate the still images into live performance, and what challenges or surprises, did that entire process of this whole collaboration bring about for you, Mritunjay?
So I do not come from a performance arts background. Even the visual arts that I do and I've been practicing is self-learned. So I have no experience in that field, and because the house blow is actually a two-part work. So one, of course, is the exhibition, which is of the images themselves, and then this performative part. So I had taken the pictures in 2019, and it was not before 2022-23 that I could actually go back to them because it was just too heavy to kind of handle. And during that particular time, Anish and I, we were discussing on for something else on the themes of home, migration, displacement, languages. And Anish was visiting my house and he saw the pictures. So I usually will print them like really small by 2 by 3 inches or things like those. And I'll spread it out on the floor of my bedroom. And I literally live with my images for, extended periods, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months if need be. And I think at that point in time, the images had already been on the floor, being shifted, being turned around, being regrouped for about 9 or 10 months. And when Anish saw the pictures, I think something clicked in him because Anish too has grown up in multiple places and in multiple geographies, and the family has moved around and he understands multiple languages. So he suggested that I write about it. And I didn't know what to write. So he said that, you already write. So just write like a chronological event of you growing up in that city and till today, and then we'll figure it out from there. So the process started there. um and I think about we went through about 20 different iterations of it. I would write, share it with him, he would look at it, it's not working, you again write, so it will again come back, the drawing board, and kept on doing this. And that is where the genius of someone like Anish, who's a very senior theater artist, comes into play, because he exactly knew when we were done. And it's a very bad habit that I have. I don't know when to stop. I'll keep tinkering with things that I've built. So um, it was also disturbing at times because it's a very personal piece of work, and then putting it out and kind of
Yes.
let someone else kind of take reins of it at times and say that, oh, this is not working, and that part could be very critical to you, very to your own heart, to your own story. So also letting go, that's a very critical part of any collaborative piece or any collaborative work, I'd say. On top of it, I have stage fright, and like to the extent that I remember that, and this came back to me while I was writing this story. I mean, this piece, that in standard 8th or 7th, I was trying to do this one, put together one play with my friends in my school, and in the audition, because no one told us how kind of act or basically put together a play on stage, I turned my back towards the jury members. And one of my teachers, who went on to actually help me a lot with studies further later in my life, had a racket in her hand and she whacked me. And that was it. That was the last time that I went onto the stage. Thereafter, through my schools, through my college, through my masters, I never went and even would present my own work. Even in group, assignments and all, I would have people who would do it. I do the assignment, but they'll be the people who go and present it. And I never kind of, put two and two together. It was only through this work when I started writing and remembering truly is that this came to me. And it was amazing, like how it works.
Writing does play a huge part in catharsis, because you look back at those very very personal moments in your life when you've gotten frightened or you've been inspired with a few absolutely life-altering changes, and I can completely relate to what you're saying, Mritunjay. I think if for that we have to meet one-on-one for me to tell you how I got my fright for mathematics and and chemistry, and I think it was just terrible teachers who were there who criticized without even understanding that how it can impact a young child, and then you never have that confidence ever to get back into a subject. But coming back, you've incorporated multiple languages like English. I don't know what one would say for Hindustani, which is Hindi. Am I right? Then Magahi and Bhojpuri and Bangla. Why was it important to use these languages, and what did it bring, to the storytelling? English, Hindi, Magahi. Magahi is which language? I've not heard much about it. Of course, Bhojpuri and Bangla, I know.
Yeah. So it's Magahi. Magahi is essentially the language which is
Sorry,
spoken.
I haven't got the word. It's called Maghi.
Magahi, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Magahi.
So
Okay,
Magahi is a language spoken in about 7 or 8 different districts across Bihar, and it kind of
okay,
extends to certain parts of Jharkhand also because the two states are so interlinked. And
okay.
then, of course, languages are not absolutes. They don't live in silos. So
They
you
don't.
can see that one of the most interesting things which happens to me, and I'm sure that anyone from that part of the country, is that whenever I went out of the state, wherever, the first thing people would ask oh, your parents are from Bihar, you are from Jharkhand. I still identify that I'm from Jharkhand, but irrespective. So people would say, oh, Bihar. So can you speak in Bihari? And I just wouldn't know how to respond to it because there is no language called Bihari. Right. I mean, yeah, movies have typecasted, Bihar and Bihari in a certain way, the classical buffoon in a way, in fact, which is so sad because Bihar in itself has about 14 different languages.
Yeah,
Um, and
yeah. And a lot of very beautiful literature.
yeah, I mean, and in each of these languages live experiences of people, their tales of migration, tales of,
Yeah.
caste, tales
Yes.
of displacement,
Yes.
and a lot of pain and anger and happiness, right? So the reason that I started using multiple languages, and the languages mostly are visible and seen or heard through the songs that we have incorporated, because in a performance people also kind of associate or kind of find their own pegs to relate with it. So the fact remains that there are so many languages, and some of them are not even mutually intelligible. So someone who's speaking, say, a Maithili may not be understood by someone who's speaking, for example, say, a Magahi. They'll will be able to pick out words, but at times it's lost, right? So first of all, I think that languages and people need representation in different ways, and theater or
Yes.
art has a responsibility to do it. We often brush aside, smaller languages, cultures, art, and kind of only look at them when it has to be made exotic to some extent for some reason, which I've never been able to
Yeah.
understand. Right. So again, I mean, coming back to the languages in use in the play itself, for example, um, the state itself uses 14 or 15 different languages, which includes Angmika, Bajika, Urdu, Bhojpuri, Magahi, Maithili, Bengali, Kuruk, Malpahariya, Santhali, Munda, Surjapuri, Tharu. Many of them are tribal languages, right?
Yes.
And again, one of
Yes.
the thoughts when you say tribal, it's like, oh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, and some southern states, right? Bihar has tribal communities and they speak their languages.
So does
Um,
Bengal.
yeah, of course, of course. So Santhal, Oraon, all these people are
Yeah, the
there.
Santals. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So Maghi is my mother tongue, right? I still speak with my mother exclusively in Maghi. Uh,
Okay.
and then, of course, English and Hindi I learned through my schooling. In fact, the Hindi that we speak in that part of the country is not the textbook Hindi that you write or is seen in the official conversation. It's quite different. Um, but that's the lingua franca, so to say. And then, of course, I learned Bangla because I studied in Calcutta and worked there for a couple of years. Then I picked up Marathi when I moved to Mumbai. And because I grew up in the Chota Nagpur region, then Nagpuri, you keep hearing it, right? Kuruk, keep hearing it. So the songs really kind of represent or kind of portray the landscape where everything has happened in that play. And these are songs that I heard when I moved to those places. Some of them are popular music, some of them are from folk and things like those. Anish, who's not a native, so to say, Hindi speaker, is really, I mean, I don't know how he would define it, but one part of his family is from Tamil Nadu, one part of his family comes from Kerala, and then he has been in Bangalore forever. But before that, he has stayed in, he grew up in Kanpur, so Hindi comes naturally to him. And he is the singer on all of these songs, so which are in Nagpuri, Bangla, and Bhojpuri. Three languages quite apart and related in different ways.
So, no maps to the art world. You didn't come from an art school, nor did you have any connections in the art world when you started. So, how has that shaped, your journey, especially when it comes to visibility and support? Because we know that, there is a perception that commercial artists succeed and others, especially abstract or socially engaged artists, are often overlooked. So how do you deal with this? And is this bias really true? I think you can reiterate that for us, and or tell us whether whether we're thinking right or wrong. And without an art school, how did you kind of really go out there and build your mark?
So it's very interesting, I mean, how it's perceived and how people deal with it. So very recently, a very prominent artist who's in the theater space was one of the jury members of the, at Serendipity too, um, told me that don't become an actor, right? And I didn't understand. But when I see the context of my own journey, it in the context of my own journey, and when I talk to people, even like Anish for that matter, or artists, wherever I go and I tell them about this experience, they kind of say, yeah, it makes sense, because art school trains you in a certain way, right?
Okay.
You start kind of getting into a mold. So someone who has studied at, say, one of the most prestigious schools for that matter, FTII, for example, they have a certain way of doing things. There is formula. I have studied, for example, business, right? So in that case, I approach branding in the way that my professors taught me. Yes, down the line, when I worked in advertising for that matter, I started understanding how it plays out in the real world. And then I made amends. But still, if I start writing out a deck, I'll use the language that I learned in B school, right? Or that my clients use in their brand manuals. So your brand manual, your B school, your Kotlers of the world, do to you as a student of business what an art school probably does to an art graduate. They start speaking similar languages. They start looking at art in a certain way. So it was very difficult. There are two ways about it, right? So the journey, when I started up, for example, I didn't even know the language of it. Yes, you can pick up a camera, and cameras have become accessible, and it's amazing how technology has evolved and how easy it has become to make a clean picture, right? But the art part of it truly comes from your own practice.
Yeah.
How do you decide to frame the same scene will differ from person to person. The aesthetics will change, right? You can again go on to YouTube or pick up a book or attend a workshop. But again, you're just, kind of learning the language. That's about it. So yes, learning the language was one part of it. Even to be able to, write, for example, a grant application. I didn't know. I didn't know for the longest time. And it took me a lot of trial, a lot of error. And I think that is where coming from a art college or knowing the right people matters. Um,
I
because
agree with you on that.
yeah, because that can kind of become like a gatekeeping. You'll
Yeah.
not be allowed into certain circles, or you wouldn't know what to do about it. So you'll see, that there is a call for a grant, and they're asking certain questions, but the language that you will use will be very different from what probably they'll expect. Thankfully, not every grant or every organization kind of deals in the same language, and some of them are really open to new people coming in from other practices, cross culture. I mean, cross practice practitioners. Some of them are really open to it. Even at Serendipity, for example, I remember that I'm not from the field. It was the first time that I was applying for a grant, which was a performance grant and not really just an exhibition grant. And they were very open to it. So yes, there are avenues, but at the same time, there are a lot of bottlenecks to it, and you have to figure out how to do it. So my example, for example, one of the biggest challenges is how do you really kind of get paid for your art? Because with
That's
digital,
something everybody wants to know. All artists want to know.
yeah, because especially with digital, I mean, the kind of penetration that has happened, there are so many creators. Everyone who has a phone or access to phone can do it,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
all the art out there and so much content is free.
Yeah,
Every
it is.
day, we are creating more than 5 billion images and growing, right? So why will someone pay for your image? What have you done to it that no one else has done or can do properly, right? So I also kind of started figuring out my own niche, and I figured out that I love to tell stories, and my background from wherever I've come and places I've lived and, in the areas that I worked, I figured out that I can tell stories which can work for collectives, for NGOs, for CSRs, for independent spaces, right? People who are okay taking a chance with you at times, giving you that first shot. And they probably are not looking only at your CV. So I think those are the places one starts with. Visibility and validity don't come easy when you don't have, formal affiliations. But that initial foot in the door becomes that much more trickier because of that, right? And
Yeah.
age, of course, also plays a role. I had to create my own momentum, starting with very small projects, self-funded projects, saying yes to almost anything that aligned with my values. Um, and support also came in unexpected ways. Friends, mentors that I met by chance along the way, organizations that were willing to take that risk, of course, very critical. And some of them were okay even with, someone who's not that polished in the institutional terms or sense of that. But I think one of the most critical things is courage to put your work out in front of people. You shouldn't self-reject. You have to
Yeah.
bat yourself. You have to bat for yourself.
I need us to talk a little bit about gatekeeping. ये मेरे लिए बड़ा ही interesting topic इसलिए है because ये जो gatekeeping जो चलता आ रहा है मतलब आर्ट की दुनिया में तो gatekeeping होनी नहीं चाहिए, लेखक के दुनिया में, आर्ट के दुनिया में, फिल्मों की दुनिया में, but वो gatekeeping है, और उस gatekeeping से तोड़ के घुसते हुए, especially for people who are starting, life from not, from institutes that, you've already created your entire ecosystem, as you say. So, tell me a little bit about this, about the gatekeeping part, Mritunjay.
I'll give you an example. So there are grants. Some of them are very prestigious grants. And they come out roughly, every year. Some of them are annual, some are biannual like that, right? And their last dates or themes kind of shift every year. And if you are not in the know, you'll only get to know about them, even online for that matter, almost at the very last minute. By then, you either have a work which kind of aligns with, or you don't. In which case, you will not be able to produce that work. Sometimes you'll barely have like 3 to 5 days to apply for it. And the application process or the forms in themselves are quite lengthy. And it takes time to kind of, build it. But if you are in the know, you are, you know certain people, you are part of certain circles, then you probably already know about it. Even some of the jury members will be known to you. And again, I'm not saying that, it's a scenario wherein only the people who are in the know and, if you already know the jury members, then only probably you have a shot. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that it does help. You already know what.
Of course it helps. Come on, Mritunjay. Let's not fool one another. It does help.
Yeah.
It helps. The minute you know people, you get a quicker access to things.
Yeah. More than the access, I believe, of course, access is very critical. But I think more than the access, you already know to some extent what kind of work will be accepted at a certain, platform.
I
Or what
agree.
work is, expected over there.
How sad. My heart breaks at that, because there are so many amazing artists all over who may not be able to even showcase their work, excepting for people who've really already made their name or they are very in tune with, and especially when you talk about, art from the tribal community, art from places that, where the language also becomes a barrier. So even for them, some of them are just dying today because of the lack of, of a patron to take this forward. And that really, really saddens me. So let's just talk, about your film Mountain Murals, which you made as part of the Grounded Imaginaries Fellowship. So what was the genesis of that work and what is the kind of stories you were hoping to capture in the hills?
So, Grounded Imaginaries is a fellowship that is jointly run by the Sydney Environment Institute at the University of Sydney, India and Bharat Together Trust, and Social Entrepreneurship Association of Auroville. And one of the legs of this particular fellowship was to culminate with a series of wall murals that were being done in Nilgiris in 3 different locations across, Ooty. And I was called in to be the documentarian on this project. And initially, the brief was just to capture pictures, kind of behind the scenes and, document it. But once we were there, we figured that it needs a film. And again, it was very last minute. I was already there. I was a single person because I was supposed to be the photographer and suddenly turned into a film project. And there was no one to help me with that, right? So when I was conducting the initial interviews, especially with Heis, who ran the project, and that point in time, he was not in India. He was outside India. So we conducted a Zoom interview like that. It really kind of opened up my own eyes to, how something like climate change, which we see, everyone is talking about it and we all think that we know about it and yet we know nothing about it. And how those people, those communities who actually are living it, see it, right? So they don't see it as a one day, clean break, 2 degrees centigrade change in, climate and everything is gone. They see it as a very gradual and a very evolving process. They are dealing with it on a daily basis. They see it in terms of how the tea which used to grow on their lands has changed, right? They see it in terms of how the wildlife which used to be in the forest has started migrating into the cities. They see it in terms of how the birds that would sing songs for them have moved up, or their songs have changed, right? Or the timing has changed, right? So the film in itself was a very straightforward film. It was just, conducting interviews with the artists who were doing it. We're basically making the wall mural with Janet, who was one of the key collaborators. She was the one who had received the fellowship. And we have collaborated more thereafter too. And the people who were running the fellowship essentially. But once we started talking to people there, and I realized that one of the artists was from a local indigenous community, his point of view and how his community sees it became the core of the film, right? And the
That's
of course,
personal also for you, Mritunjay?
yeah. Again, because I grew up in a area which was built on tribal lands, the whole city on tribal lands. And I grew up, and most of my generation grew up without this awareness of what it means to be tribal, what it means to be displaced, right? Because migration was given, right? My own father and that whole generation has migrated in, and we've seen it, and we know that after a point we too need to migrate for studies, for education, for
It's a
job.
topic that's exceptionally close to my heart, Mritunjay, and migration and just this whole, your work, especially why it's extremely interesting for me because personally, I think I haven't been more drawn to an exhibition in a really long time like yours because there's a certain focus on the underrepresented communities, and so I especially remember that photograph of a migrant worker standing. I think it was on a railway track, right? Opposite her is a railway track. So tell me a little bit about the indigenous leaders, women farmers, informal workers. How do you approach these questions of representation and power, in those contexts?
Uh, I wouldn't say that it's easy. It's a very tricky situation, right? Because
Yeah.
um, you go in, you have been called in as the expert, so to say, right? As the documentation expert, and yet you know nothing. So I might have worked with, the Santhal tribe, the Orao tribe, and I grew up in that area, for example, in Jharkhand. But when I go down south, for example, in Tamil Nadu, and I meet a person who's from the Irula community, my only in, so to say, is that this person is from an indigenous community, and they have certain common, values which are more community led as compared to personal led. Uh, their relationship with land, their relationship with their own people, with their songs, with their culture, would be of a certain, you know, way, of a certain shape, of certain color. But that's about it. I know nothing about them. I would probably know more of a person who's not a tribal, not an indigenous person from Tamil Nadu, as compared to someone who's from the community. Um, and you're trying to balance your urge to kind of, shape stories in a certain way because you've done it in a certain way. You have a
Yeah.
template. And at the same time, you need to respect the fact that they have been telling their stories for ages
Yes.
in the same form, not in the same
Yes.
shape, and maybe
Yes.
not aesthetic based on what is aesthetically pleasing to you. So how do you kind of take those stories, respect them, give them all the due respect, and let them speak for themselves, and yet be more universal? Can be more people can connect to it, attach to it, understand it. So how do you really frame it without really breaking their own frames? That becomes really important. You can't lose context. I can't simply take out a motif which is on the wall because it looks good to me and use it as a background for an interview, or say for telling a story for that matter. Just because it looks pleasing, I also need to give context. It could be part of a celebration. It could be part of a mourning. It could be part of like their worship. So that context needs to come, and I think that is the most critical part. So my usual process is that I'll talk to them, go meet them. I'll not even shoot one frame, at times for say a month, um, an hour, depending on where you are, how quickly you kind of work with people, attach with people, and once, for example, if it's a film or even if it's audio that I'm recording for writing later on, I'll just let it sit there, and then I'll let it play. Okay, it could be recording for 3 minutes. It can end up recording for 3 hours. If that person needs 3 hours, I'll give them 3 hours. And then at every stage of editing, it goes back not to a client or a grant authority or another director or whosoever it is. It goes to the person who has said it. And only if they feel that it is still dignified, it still makes sense, the context is still there, is that when it makes the final cut. I have at one point removed a very critical interview from a short film because the person, one day before the final release, said that they are not comfortable, about what they had said. And I still made the film work with that because that's their wish. That's how they want to portray it.
Yeah, that entire line of walking, it's so treacherous because people sometimes want to take back what they've said. And I've gone through that myself, in interviews that I've done with people, that they have opened up and they've spoken, and then they call you the next day to say that I'm not comfortable sharing that. And that actually is the crux of the whole story. And then you don't know what to do with it, because one part is there that you have to do justice to their feelings. And, that other part of you is the artist in you that wants to portray the truth of what, has been shared. So I understand. So, Mritunjay, let's talk about migration as a metaphor. Your life itself is a story of, migration from small towns to big cities, from state employment to artistic independence. I mean, this is bloody phenomenal. Okay. So how do you carry that experience into your work? And for me, migration, the story of migration, it is so deep because it is not just migrating from the city, it's also that internal migration that all of us do. And I'm a migrant myself, through generations migrations actually. Bengalis who once lived in undivided India and then, landed up in East Pakistan, that went on to become Bangladesh, and then from there, came into India, and then from there into different parts of India. And, within this migration, there's a lot of underrepresented mainstream media and art, right? So what does it mean really to tell these stories, especially with dignity and depth? And I remember there was very long. I was very conscious that people used to call you refugee, 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 and I haven't been a refugee ever. But because I have been born, in Delhi, I've been born in the capital of the country, and yet there was a part of me that wanted to hide this entire thing till one day I grew up and I embraced it, because it takes so much of courage to move on, create a life with dignity, and stay on with the human values in you, which takes me very long today to understand. I want to delve deep into your life and tell me a little bit about this migration part.
See, migration can mean so many different things to so many different people.
Yes.
Like you rightly said. So when you grow up in a city like, say, Mumbai or a Bangalore, migration looks very different.
Yes.
You probably have migrated from a city like this to, say, Europe or America for better career opportunities, because you already have quite a bit here. But when you grow up in a small town, anywhere for that matter, even in Karnataka for that matter, or say in Maharashtra for that matter, a Mumbai or a Bangalore, or a Calcutta for that matter, become very different for you. It's not the same, right? And in the context of, say, East India especially, the migrations that have happened generation-wise, historically, and where we are today.
Politically too.
Political too, right? So in Eastern India, and I keep on, reusing the word Eastern India, because the popular imagination is, oh, it's all North. Just like people in East and North will say, oh, everything is South, So,
Yes.
yeah. So in Eastern India, for example, if you look at, say, Eastern UP or Bihar for that matter, or Jharkhand for that matter, to an extent even West Bengal or Orissa, historically the migrations were following the trade routes, right? So people from Eastern UP or Bihar came down to Calcutta to work, right, as coolies. People from Bihar during the British period were sent off to Caribbeans, right, to work as girmitias, or South Africa for that matter. Then at one point, of course, Calcutta was like the financial capital, the commercial capital, and a lot of migration was happening further eastwards. So even in our songs, Bhojpuri songs, Maghei songs, Angika songs, you will have mentions of people moving to Calcutta.
Yeah.
And that is where, again, I mean, I'm kind of mixing the language here, but important that when we kind of dismiss languages because only 30,000 people speak it, but they carry the stories of generations. If, for example, I mean, Bhojpuri is one of the most widely spoken languages, but for a second, let's imagine that Bhojpuri is kind of shelled. What will happen to all those beautiful, and not only the ones that we hear today, the crass ones, but all those beautiful songs that's sung there, the birhas, the chaitas, the fagua. What will happen to that? So migration in my case, for example, of course, I mean, I grew up in a city wherein you were already expected to migrate after a point, because you have to study more and there is nothing, right? I remember in Bokaro, and I don't know the state right now, there used to be only 2 colleges. So after standard 12th, you only had a city college. Literally, it was literally called city college, right? So a student who will get admissions nowhere else, or can't probably, will end up there. Or there was a Mahila college, and that's about it. I don't know the state today, but I'm sure that in Ranchi and all you can, but in Bokaro, I don't think you have. So migration was given. I knew that, like everyone else, I too need to migrate. So that in itself was not a shock. But again, for example, when you look at the films that were made in that period, they told you a different story of migration. And when I migrated, for that matter, I saw a very different picture in whichever places I went to. So Calcutta for that, or say when I moved to Hyderabad for my studies, or when I moved to, say, Bombay, or when I went out of India, right? So it was very different. And that was the real shock. And how do you deal with it? And as I said, the Hindi that we speak in that part of the country is very different. So that was the first shock in itself, right? Why are people speaking like this? What is mere ko tere the? I've always said, hum. Um, and that itself was a shock. So how do you really kind of work around it? How do you work with that? And that became the first point of contention. How do you negotiate that?
There's so many layers to this, Mritunjay. I can go on and on, about migration and all the things that goes along with it, the loneliness that comes in for a certain generation of people, especially my mother. She is unable right now to rebuild her life. And they did not have a choice because I was a single child, and but for me to be able to be their support, it only meant that they move from the place that they had built their own home. So migration, and most of my work also is around displacement and migration, because it's a topic that is extremely close to my heart. Like, I go into my mother's bathroom and सारी चीजें रखी हुई हैं, पर उसके बीच में एक क्यो कार्पिन के bottle रखा हुआ है. And that is what struck me also, in your exhibition. And I remember that. And every time I go into her bathroom and I use it and I look at that carpin oil, and somewhere a little part of my rootedness to, this entire culture that I grew up in just feels a little, seen, by that absolutely inanimate carpin bottle. uh, so yeah, I mean, all of these things and more, is part and parcel, I think, of migration, little stuff, and a very, very large stuff too. So, what would you tell somebody from a small town, perhaps in a government job or a conventional path, who wants to pivot into the arts or storytelling, which you need oodles and oodles of guts to do that, Mrityunjay. तो आप उनको क्या बोलिए कि ऐसा क्या mistake है जो आपको लगता है कि आपने किया होगा that you don't want somebody else to do?
I'd say that the biggest service that you can do yourself in that position is to stop self-rejection. I think that's the biggest point.
Yeah.
When you grow up with, more boundaries than ground to walk or run on, you forget that you can run or fly. Right? There are constraints. There always will be. And irrespective of which background you come from, whether you come from a very privileged background, whether your family is, one of industrialist or not, I mean, that's your constraint. That's where you are, right? If you come from a middle class, lower middle class family with limited means, with a big family to support for that matter, you have heard more no's probably than yeses.
Yes.
And you start telling yourself that no, can't be done. No, it shouldn't be done. I only have so much. There is job security. What will happen if I shift, right? So I think that's the most critical part, that that self-rejection has to stop. At some point, we need to make that leap of faith. Yes, I'm not saying that you should blindly kind of, and it's as important to also know when to stop. When to stop, because it can just take over your being.
Yes,
Chasing a particular dream, and is it even a dream if it's kind of not leading to something? That question kind of keeps coming back to you. And the myth that when you become an artist, for example, a filmmaker, you only make films. No, the truth is that you have to wear many hats and you have to be ready for it. Right.
Yeah.
So at times, for example, I mean, you have to do something that you never tried. I remember on a set, I keep on calling it a set. It was not even a set. It was a 3-person operation. The camera person who showed up, his audio equipment was not working, and he didn't know how to make it work. Right.
God.
And there was so much noise there that the in-camera mic would just have not worked. Right. And suddenly I became responsible for audio. And I figured it, right? I made it work. But you have to be ready for it. You just can't kind of throw your hands up and say, "Oh, this is your responsibility." And, because especially as a documentary filmmaker, your story will shift. If it's in-set thing, so you will say sorry to your actors, probably pay them some more, and they'll come again tomorrow and perform for you. But this can't happen in a local community setting where people have, literally not gone to work that day, lost their day's wage, and come and, sit for you to record this one thing with them. So I think that is important.
So, what does your inner compass point to next? Be it visually, politically, or personally. What are the questions really you're asking yourself now as an artist?
Slowly over the years, I have started experimenting with more forms, and it also means to teach yourself to do things that you don't know, you have never done. Um, the story of home, migration, and displacement culture has always kind of intrigued me. And currently, for example, I'm working on two projects. One of them is editing work, wherein a friend of mine, with whom actually I worked on mountain murals, Janet, she had walked along the coast of Kerala. So started in at the edge of Karnataka, walked till Kanyakumari. It was a 850-kilometer long coastal walk, and she met people there along the way. And she is mostly focused on the question of how people in those regions see climate change, how they experience it. But I think my own experience kind of sees different themes and motives there. So now we are kind of negotiating how, and how do we edit it. So I had not shot the film. I had not edited it initially. I was not looking to edit it. And the film has been stuck for about 4 years now. But now that it has come to me, I am in my own way kind of trying to look for other themes. So I see that there is a very beautiful sub-story of migration, because it's Kerala, right? So a lot of income of the state is generated because of migration. So how do you look at that migration, which is seen somehow because it's in a foreign land? Uh, it receives more respect, right? You're called an expat. Uh, while if you migrate from, say, Eastern UP or a Bihar or a Bengal or a Orissa, then you're a migrant and you're seen as a problem. So how do you reconcile those, things?
Oh
So,
my
so
God, golden words, Mritunjay.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to negotiate that. For example, I'm trying to work on that film. I'm working on a film of my own, which is in very early stages, still doing the research. It is about displacement, right? Because a large water-related, let's call it, project is coming up somewhere, and people are being moved in numbers. And usually, when a thing like this happens, the explanation is always the greater good. But who's good, right? And who who is to say that, 4,000 is a good number to be moved, but 4,200 is too much, or 3,800 is too less. So who decides that cutoff? And even in while we have so many guidelines, we have so many rules, and there is a way in which the operation should happen. Is it really happening on the ground? And again, that's for maybe journalists, and I'm not a journalist by any stretch of imagination, and I don't think my work is of that nature. But I want to tell the stories of the people and what happens to those people once they are moved. And how do you explain to them why they have been?
So thank you so much, Mritunjay, for taking all the time today, and your vulnerability and your vision. The House Blue is more than an exhibition for all our listeners. It's an invitation to pause, remember, and ask questions that most of us often avoid. Thank you so much for taking all the time and being on today's podcast.